Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. Greetings, drowsy spirit. Tonight, I will tell you a story that will help you fall asleep soundly. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in the comments section. I would also love to know what story you would want to hear next. That night, I was traveling home down a deserted country road where the rain beats so hard on your windshield that you can hardly see what's in front of you. The wipers were having trouble keeping up with the late hour, past midnight. I had just gotten out of a grueling warehouse shift. I just wanted to get home, open a bottle, and crash since my back hurt. I saw him at that point. A man, completely soaked from head to toe, was strolling down the shoulder. Every step he made appeared to require all of his power, because the rain had turned the dirt by the road into thick mud. Instinctively, I slowed down, and in the rain, my headlights caught him. His clothing was soiled, jeans that appeared to have been unwashed for weeks and a torn jacket. I considered driving by him for a moment. You hear tales of individuals making foolish decisions, picking up strangers at night, and making headlines the following day. But I hesitated because of the expression on his face. He had the appearance of someone who had been through hell and had lost all the energy necessary to conceal it. Halfway down, I rolled down the window. "Man, do you need a ride?" He halted his progress and slowly turned to face me. His voice sounded harsh and worn out. "I would like to know whether you're going downtown." My eyes swept across the passenger seat. "Join in." Without saying another word, he entered. I was the first to notice the fragrance, dirt, wet garments, and a faint metallic smell, like rust or blood. He simply glanced out the window, watching the rain streak across the glass, without making eye contact. I tried to strike up a conversation. "It's a terrible night to be out here on foot." He didn't respond. "You hungry?" I said after a minute, as I had some things at home. "I am able to make a quick remedy." He cocked his head slightly this time. There was something in his eyes, despite their glassy appearance. Something void. "Yes, please. A few days have passed since I last ate." I wasn't prepared for how hard that affected me. I had been there previously. Hungry, broke, and nobody cares. "All right, my place is just up ahead," I said to him. "We'll feed you, and then you may collapse on the couch." He gave a single, silent nod. He went in, dripping all over the foyer floor, and I said, "Go ahead and come inside. I'll get some towels and throw something together." I had parked in the driveway when we arrived at my house. As I inspected the refrigerator, I instructed him to take a seat at the kitchen table. I had a loaf of bread, some leftover chicken, and a few beers. In an attempt to maintain the conversation, I began to heat things up. "What is your name?" Then, I opened a beer and asked. He hesitated for a while. "Caleb," at last he said. "I'm Logan. Nice to meet you, Caleb." He nodded while continuing to look at the ground. There was something about his voice. Every syllable seems to have been forced out. "Are you from this area?" I repeated my question. It was. Was it once? After that, he remained silent. He just sat there stooped, spilling rainwater over my floor from his sleeves. I shook my head slightly and turned back to the stove. "You're a very reserved man. Are you aware of that?" Quiet. I turned to see that the chair was vacant. "Caleb, I made a call." No response. I looked in the bathroom, the living room, and the hallway. Nothing. When I peeked out the front door, the rain was still coming down, and there were no tracks on the porch. So I thought maybe he had gone outdoors. My chest constricted for some reason. Then I caught another glimpse. The door to the basement was ajar. No one ever opens that door. I always keep it locked. My pulse was racing as I stood there looking at it, beginning to increase. "Hey man, basement's off limits," I yelled, attempting to sound composed. "You can't just go down there." There was no response, only the sound of water dropping faintly below. I took the torch from the counter and started to descend, one slow step at a time. As I went down, the moist, stagnant air grew colder. I halted halfway down. In the center of the basement, he was standing. He was staring at the floor with his back to me. I said carefully, "Caleb." He didn't look back. "Hey dude, what are you doing down here? You can't just speak." His voice was unsteady and low. "You did it." I went cold. "What?" At that moment, he turned, and I was completely chilled by the expression on his face. He no longer had glazed eyes. They were abrasive and full of rage. He extended his hand inside his, took something out of the jacket pocket. There was a silver necklace with a tiny pendant in the shape of a heart hanging from his fingers. He added, "I found this here," in his shaky, angry voice. My stomach fell when I said, "It was my wife's." He yelled, "Look, man, I don't know what you think. You took her from me," in an angry tone. "4 months, I searched for you. I believed I would never see you again." He produced a knife. "Whoa, Caleb. Hello." I raised my hands and said, "Put that down. You're doing something wrong." He made a lunge. The sword cut through the air, grabbing my jacket sleeve and narrowly avoiding my neck. My flashlight collapsed, spinning across the concrete as I staggered back and collided with the wall. "You killed her," he said as he charged at me once again. I fell backward, my hand automatically going to my waist. Caleb collapsed onto the floor, gasping, blood soaking through his shirt, and I stood there breathing heavily, staring at him. His fingers twitched, trying to reach for the knife again. I pulled out my handgun and fired once, twice. Then there was nothing, just the sound of rain hitting the upstairs windows. For a long time, I just stood there, heart pounding, gun still raised. Then I slowly lowered it and examined the necklace that was next to his hand. I picked it up, and the heart pendant was cracked down the middle. I said to myself, "You shouldn't have come here, man." I turned away, went back upstairs, and shut the basement door after me. I sat at the kitchen table, looking at my reflection in the dark window, and my hands were shaking, but not out of fear, but rather from something colder, something I had been living with 4 years. I used to run with a crew that broke into houses back then, just small jobs, quick hits. But one night things went wrong. A woman woke up, and things got messy. I did what I had to do, and she died, even though I didn't mean it. I left town after that, changed my name, and started over. I poured myself a drink, trying to keep my hands from shaking, and looked at the clock. It was 2:47 a.m. Thought I had put that life behind me forever, but the past never stays buried forever. It always finds a way back to your door, especially on nights like this. I muttered to myself, I need to be more careful next time. I remember that night like it was burned into my brain. My name is Hannah, and I was 17 when this happened, back when I thought I had the world figured out. I grew up in Crestview, a small town in Illinois that is mostly quiet except for the occasional drunk fight outside a bar or kids racing down the highway. It wasn't exactly dangerous, but it wasn't Mayberry either. I could still hear the rain outside, steady and unrelenting, and somewhere deep in the basement beneath the creak of old wood and dripping pipes, I swore I heard a faint whisper, a woman's voice. I went to a diner off Burwood Street with my best friend, Lena, during the last week of summer. That weird time when the air starts to cool down, but still smells like barbecue smoke and asphalt. We talked 4 hours about college applications, boys, and all the typical teenage nonsense, and at around 10:30, we paid the bill, divided the fries, and left. Lena's brother came to get her, and I said, "Hell, what's the worst that could happen in this sleepy town?" I started walking, feeling full and humming a song under my breath. I shoved my hands in the pockets of my hoodie, feeling the cool wind cutting through the thin fabric, and somewhere between the gas station and the old laundromat, I smelled the smell of rain. It hadn't started yet, but it was coming, so I sped up a little. I probably should have kept my head straight, but I was distracted not by music, not by my phone, but by something stupid. I lifted my arm and sniffed. The streetlights flickered yellow, and the crickets were loud enough to drown out my thoughts. I wrinkled my nose and mumbled, "GH, good work, Hannah, very elegant." And that's when I bumped right into someone. "Whoa, I'm sorry," I said, stumbling back. The girl I'd run into spun around, clutching her bag. She looked a little older than me, maybe 20 or 21. Her hair was dyed black with a red streak running through it, messy and half covering one eye. "Oh, no, it's all right," she responded hastily, her voice a little slurred. "Completely my fault. I wasn't keeping an eye on my destination." I detected the subtle sting of alcohol immediately as she smiled, kind of dizzy, and blinked as if the street light was too bright. "Are you sure you're okay?" I said, and she nodded, smoothing her hair back. "Yeah, I'm good. You're really gorgeous, you know that." My cheeks began to flush. "Thanks, but it's nothing special," she said in a soft but shaky voice. "That outfit looks good on you. I love the jeans and the shoes." I looked down and saw that she was obviously intoxicated. "It's nothing special," I said, laughing awkwardly. She smiled broadly and said, "You live around here?" "Yeah, about a mile down." "That's crazy. I live near Elm Street." There was a brief silence, not far from here, with the only sounds being the wind rustling through trees and the distant hum of cars. I shook her hand, and she remained surprisingly firm despite the alcohol. "You want to hang out? I have some wine coolers back at my house, so I can relax, chat, or do anything else." "Maybe some other time," I responded cautiously, because I had to get home. I didn't want to be impolite, but I also didn't want to go out drinking with a stranger at 11 o'clock. "Most likely. My mother is waiting up." "Fair enough," Riley finally answered, tilting her head as if she had given it careful thought. "But you seem cool, Hannah. I want to get together sometime. Have you got your phone?" I nodded, and we exchanged numbers. I recall her smile not eerie or phony, just exhausted before everything fell apart in an instant. I saw a glimpse of movement behind her out of the corner of my eye, initially supposing it was a shadow or a trick of the streetlight, but it wasn't. A tall, hard-working man wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled down, with a determined gait, emerged from between two parked cars. Before my mind could register it, he charged, saying, "Riley, look out." I yelled. She shrieked after turning in confusion, and the man grabbed her by the shoulder, pulling her toward him. At the same time, I noticed something glinting in the light. He repeatedly thrust a knife into her arm, causing the sound of tearing flesh to blend with her screams. For a moment, I was too stunned to move, and the air was filled with the wet sound of blood hitting the sidewalk. When he raised his arm again, I exclaimed, "Hey!" The knife clattered on the ground and spun away into the darkness as I yelled and tackled him from behind. He growled more powerfully than he snarled something I couldn't understand. But when I grabbed the knife and threw it into the middle of the street, he stopped struggling long enough for me to kick him hard in the ribs. "Run," I said, expecting him to roll me off, but adrenaline made me a wild animal. Riley was gripping her arm, blood streaming from her fingers, and her eyes were wide and distracted as I cried, "I can't." "Yes, you can. Come." We ran down the road, both of us gasping, half in shock, every sound behind us making me think he was chasing us, and I didn't stop until I saw the warm glow of my house up ahead. I grabbed her hand, the uninjured one, and pulled her up. Somehow, she started running. I rushed through the door, shouting, "Mom, call 911. Dad." My mom's eyes widened at the sight of Riley, and blood coated her arm, spilling onto the wooden floor, and my parents ran out of the living room. My gosh, his knife was down by Birchwood. Dad didn't even wait for the others. He grabbed the phone and called the police while I was trying to keep Riley awake. Riley was pale and trembling, but she managed to whisper, "Someone attacked her." Mom gasped, grabbing a towel and pressing it to the wound. "Someone attacked her," I panted. He appeared out of nowhere, and the ambulance arrived in a matter of minutes. One of the officers, an older man with a weathered face, approached me and said, "You said Birchwood Street." As they placed her into the rear, I stood there trembling and trying to keep my breathing steady as red and blue lights burst through the windows, painting the room in color. They discovered him there shortly after, unconscious, bleeding with the knife, and all the evidence spread out like a confession. Riley survived, but she lost a lot of blood. "Yeah, near the laundromat," I responded, my voice breaking. "I didn't even get to thank you," she whispered quietly when I visited her in the hospital a few days later. "You don't have to," I told her. "Just concentrate on getting better." She appeared fragile but alive, and her eyes welled with tears when she saw me. "You saved my life," she said, nodding and grinning slightly. "I mean it. I felt foolish for wandering around intoxicated like that," I answered. "We both got lucky." She squeezed my hand as she reached out. "I'm enrolled in self-defense classes when I'm not here. I take it you're accompanying me." Despite the lump in my throat, I laughed. "Yes, of course. No wine coolers this time, though." Even though that night was 2 years ago, I still occasionally strolled down Birchwood. Even though the road was repaved and new lights were installed, I can still picture the dark stains on the pavement. Riley and I fulfilled our agreement. Both of us attended martial arts training. She even makes jokes about how much better she is now than I am. However, no matter how secure a community appears, monsters don't wear warning labels. So every night when I walk home, I keep my keys between my fingers and my eyes wide open. Occasionally, they simply emerge from the space between two parked cars. I became aware that my mother had truly ceased smiling when I was 15 years old. It was not anything I immediately noticed. Like the sound of a dripping faucet, it gradually infiltrated until the entire home was silent. We used to reside in a modest rental home, a little Indiana town off the main road. There wasn't much blue fading, siding, a drooping porch, and a weed-filled backyard. Mom used to keep it warm, though. After supper, she would light candles, play soft music, and murmur while doing the clothes. After him, that ceased. Randy was his name. I still detest uttering it aloud. He wasn't in our lives for very long the first time, but he came around when I was approximately 5. Randy was simply a guy she met at work at the time, and my mom and dad were divorcing. He exuded an effortless charm that drew persons inside. His courteous nods, his southern gentleman accent, and his constant smile that lasted just long enough to be real. I didn't like him even when I was 5. Something wasn't quite right about his eyes. "I was simply being a kid," Mom remarked. She would say, "You don't know him like I do." I wish she had paid attention. We relocated to Florida to live with my grandparents when I was 10 years old. For a time, everything became more tranquil. Just my mom working at the diner, and my younger sister Leia starting school. No turmoil, no shouting. Randy used Facebook to stay in contact. Under previous pictures, he would leave a note like, "You girls look beautiful. Tell your mom I said hi." I found it strange, but my mother explained that he was simply being kind. Let's fast forward several years. She told me he was back in her life when I was 14 years old. She stirred her coffee and remarked, "I think he's changed." I recall the tone of her voice. Shuddered a little as she spoke. "He gave up alcohol. Now he's trying hard." Something inside of me twisted, but I remained silent. It was similar to what happens when you know a storm is coming and all you can do is wait. We relocated once more a few months later, this time to a small Ohio town in the north. Randy trailed behind. Shortly after, they were married. I wasn't present. For several months, I was residing with my older sister, Kayla. It wasn't until it was over that Mom revealed the wedding date to me. She remarked over the phone that it was little. At the courthouse, it was just him and me. The house immediately smelt different when I got home. He always buried himself in cheap beer, cigarette smoke, and that musty fragrance. And there he was, drinking beer while sitting on the couch, his soiled work pants, calling me kiddo as if he had earned the privilege. He said, "Hey, kiddo," and raised his can. "Greetings from home." I mumbled hey, attempted a grin, and headed straight for my room. That was when it began. Small things initially. Randy consumed more alcohol than he put in. Half of Mom's paycheck, which she received on Fridays, would be gone by Saturday morning. He had an excuse for everything. Only a few dollars were needed for gas, or I loaned it to a friend. He'll reimburse me. However, there would be fresh beer bottles clinking in the garbage and the refrigerator would be empty. He was doing more than drinking. He was keeping it a secret. He would hide cans behind the toilet, in the laundry basket, and beneath the sink. Once, Mom discovered them and became upset. "Randy, you lied to me. Keep your nagging to yourself, woman. I feel like drinking because of you." Leia would try not to cry while I sat on the edge of my bed and held her hand. They would yell until something broke or slammed. I once noticed my mother standing there, holding her face, after urinating in the hallway. He had hurled his drink can in her direction. "It just slipped," she said. It wasn't the final instance. One night I tried to speak with her. She looked so exhausted, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around her mug, staring at nothing. "You don't understand," she whispered gently. "Mom, please," I pleaded. "He's not good for you. You can't keep doing this." My voice cracked, and I hated the way it sounded. She shuddered, but she didn't look up. Randy whispered in her ear that night when he thought we were asleep. "You turn those girls against me again," he snarled. "He's sick. He needs help. Then let him get help elsewhere." But he never did. "And I'll walk out that door. You hear me," he said. He enjoyed too much control. Then he began to steal from us. Leia's piggy bank, Mom's wallet, and even the little dollars I had set aside for a new phone cover. He swore on his mother's grave that it wasn't him when his mother confronted him. "I bet you lost it, sweetie." Whispering sweet nothings, he would give her a back hug till she melted once more. I felt ill from it. Then came the night he declared his intention to end his own life. He was laying on the bed, slurring his words, intoxicated, and his mother was sitting next to him, sobbing. His grip on her wrist was too strong, and he kept saying, "I can't do this anymore. I can't live without you." Mom turned to me in a panic and said, "I'll just end it. You'll see. Call 911 now." Leia stood motionless in the doorway. She was just 9 years old. As the police arrived, I led her into the living room. After being evaluated, he returned 2 days later and pretended nothing had happened. He said, "Hey, kiddo," with that skewed smile. I wanted to yell at him. "I guess I terrified you all." Huh. Rather, I simply turned to leave. After that, he was let go from his employment. Later, Mom informed me that he had threatened his boss. It was fortunate, she claimed, that he had sold his firearm a few weeks prior. Who knows what he might have done otherwise? I still get shivers thinking about that. Then she threw him out for a time. It became quieter. We resumed our dinner time together. Leia continued to laugh. Mom even regained her smile. This time, I'm grinning a lot. Then, one evening, his pickup was back in the driveway when I got home from a friend's house. Mom had a brand new Apple Watch box in her hands while she sat on the couch. She murmured that he apologized. He will transform. I remained silent. Nothing else could be said. It was short-lived. Within a week he was drinking again. The disputes were louder, crueler, and harsher this time. Mom would cry, order him to leave, and then pleadingly ask him to return a few days later. He would shout things like, "You're nothing without me," or "You'd be living in a box if it weren't for me." We were all broken by that cycle. He cheated, which was the last straw. His phone had texts, which Mom discovered. Tina is a woman. He vowed that it had only occurred because she had shoved him away. Mom ultimately booted him out for real that night. We replaced the locks. The house felt lighter for the first time in years. But then the messages began. Blocked voicemails, emails, and phone numbers. They were simply desperate at start. "I cherish you. This is something you'll regret. My life was ruined by you." Then they became darker. He whispered in his voicemail one night, "You think you're safe. You're not. You're not his new girlfriend, any of you. The person with whom he had an affair, also began to threaten him. "You think you can take my man? I'll slit your throat," she yelled over the phone to her mother one evening. "While you're sleeping." That was all. We dialed the police. They claimed that because it was only verbal, there wasn't much they could do. Only spoken. Mom's phone was vibrating non-stop for weeks. We occasionally heard his truck's engine rumbling late at night, before it faded into the night. I put my baseball bat next to my bed and went to sleep. Despite the heat of summer, Yayla kept her window locked. My stomach clenches whenever I hear a truck engine outside. But the emails ceased a few months ago. I am now 17. I watch Mom wince when her phone rings, even though she acts like everything is behind her. Leia will no longer sleep without a nightlight. I occasionally find my mother mumbling to herself while gazing out the window after dark. He is unable to locate us again. I wish I had trusted her because I observed a truck parked across the street last night while I was making my way home from work. Identical color and make. It was gone when I looked again. Color and make. It was gone when I looked again. However, I can assure you that I detected the identical combination of smoke and alcohol in the air. Additionally, the identical brand of cigarettes he used to smoke was found on our porch this morning. It might not be anything. I may just be paranoid, but I know better in my heart. The sound of a psychopath's voice is not something you simply forget, and you're constantly checking behind you. I never imagined that I would ever again reflect on that period of my life. My hands still tremble a little when I think about it. Perhaps, though, expressing this may help me get over what still bothers me. What he did to me. I've known Ryan Hale for 6 years. I was 26 years old and living in Mason Ridge, a small town in northern Ohio. At the time, after splitting from my ex and landing a new job at a nearby art gallery, I had recently moved there. Although it wasn't much, it covered the rent and kept me occupied enough to make me forget my loneliness. That's how something as innocent as roses brought Ryan into my life. He was the owner of Hale's Blooms, a small flower business down the street, nestled between a thrift shop and a laundromat. It was little, but the scent of it was unbelievable. How much came out each time the door was opened. Roses, jasmine, fresh lilac, everything. He was constantly there, arranging flowers with such concentration that it appeared to be prayer. I came in one afternoon to pick up a bouquet for an art exhibition. Ryan greeted me with his warm, kind, and effortless smile. His clean-cut, towering frame revealed toned forearms when his sleeves were rolled up. He remarked, "Hey there," and gave me a single white rose. "Those on the house first." I chuckled uncomfortably. "That's very kind of you." "No," he replied. That comment stuck with me. You just look like someone who appreciates beautiful things. Most people don't. Although it seemed like a compliment, there was a serious undertone, as if beauty was more than simply something he appreciated. It was necessary for him. I would see him around town throughout the course of the following few weeks. He would occasionally wave. He occasionally brought flowers to the gallery. He began to recall small details about me, including my favorite coffee, the color of my clothes, and my earrings. At first, it was flattering. At last, he asked me out, and I accepted. It was the ideal first date, nearly too good. We visited a little Italian eatery by the river. He presented me with a bunch of flowers. He answered, "I picked these just this morning, like you, fresh." I turned red. He poured me some wine and laughed softly. He was affable, humorous, and attentive. It wasn't common. He stated something strange when he dropped me off that evening. "It's actually not necessary for you to make any changes. I already like you just the way you are." I assumed he was referring about personality at the time. I know better now. We spent roughly 3 months dating. He always brought flowers when we met, and each one was flawless, with not a single petal out of place. He claimed that wilting ones were intolerable to him. He termed them dead beauties. I unexpectedly dropped by his store one afternoon. He was humming a song while he trimmed stems behind the counter. His expression brightened at the sight of me. "Hello, lovely. My day was just made by you." I grinned. "I didn't intend to surprise you." He laughed. "You can ambush me at any time." Then he grimaced as he picked up a bunch of carnations and looked at them. He remarked, "These ones aren't good." He broke one of them in half at the stem before I could inquire what he meant. Then one more, and one more. The quiet shop reverberated with the sound of stems shattering. I said, "Ryan," with caution. He murmured, "They're not pretty," and asked, "Why are you doing that?" When I see ugly things, I get upset. His expression wasn't pleasant for the first time. When he looked up at me, his eyes appeared nearly vacant. I went cold. Then he grinned abruptly once again. "However, you don't need to worry because you're attractive." His thumb touched my cheek as he reached out and said, "I'd never break you." His tone made my stomach turn. A second too long, his hand lingered. I could see how firm his hold had been when he released it. I had trouble sleeping that night. I repeatedly relived that moment, the abrupt change in his expression, the shattering of the stems, and his declaration, "I'd never break you." From that day forward, he began to behave strangely. "Are you okay? Did I do something wrong? You're not ignoring me, right?" He would text me if I didn't text him back as soon as possible. When I did respond, he would write, "Good. I just don't like when people fade away. Flowers fade." People shouldn't, I told myself. He was just insecure. But I felt something darker, like he was trying to control every breath I took. One evening, I visited his shop again. He was working out alone behind the counter with dumbbells. He laughed when I walked in. "Don't judge me. You have to maintain your strength to handle all the deliveries." But it wasn't funny. His veins bulged, and sweat trickled down his temple. His eyes had a serious, obsessive expression. When I told him I was tired and had to go home, he said quietly, "You should smile more. You look prettier when you." I agreed, but my chest felt constricted. That evening, I contacted my best friends, Ben and Alicia, who had never met him, and told them everything. Ben said, "That sounds like a control freak." Alicia responded, "That's not just being domineering, girl. That's risky." They were correct. I therefore made the decision to stop things, although I was afraid, very frightened. Thus, we devised a strategy. The following evening, the sky was grey and cold, and I remember standing outside Ryan's shop, clutching my phone so tightly that my fingers hurt, telling him it was over. Ben and Alicia would park across the street and watch in case something went wrong. I didn't want to involve the police unless absolutely necessary. I just wanted to get out. He opened the door, surprised to see me. He sighed and went outside, folding his arms. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath. "Hey, you're early. Come in." I shook my head. "Can we talk out here?" He scowled. "Why?" "It's freezing. Please," I whispered gently. "When you say things like that," he murmured, "you look ugly." "Ryan, I can't do this anymore." He blinked as if the words hadn't registered. "Do what?" "This, us. I'm sorry, but I think we should break up for 5 long seconds." He just stared at me until his lips curled into a small bitter smile. "What did you just say?" My breath caught in my throat. I could hardly breathe. He tilted his head. "You were such a pretty flower. Why do you have to ruin it?" His hand shot out and grabbed my throat before I could react. It was like iron, tight, deliberate, shaking with rage. "Ryan, stop." I choked out, clawing at his wrists. He said through clenched teeth, "You're supposed to stay pretty. I told you not to wither." The world blurred at the edges. They tackled Ryan to the ground, his hands ripping off my neck, and I gasped for air and staggered backward, coughing. Ben pinned him down, while Alicia called 911. Then I heard someone shouting my name. It was Ben. He ran across the street with Alicia right behind him. Ryan screamed, "Let me go. I own her. My flower is her." I was shaking so much that I was unable to grip my phone when the police arrived. After Ryan was arrested, the officers informed me that he had a sealed case involving another woman from 2 years prior, who had also survived an attack and had been almost killed by him. It seems that his family's wealth got him off with probation and a settlement, but this time it stuck, and he was imprisoned for attempted murder. 4 months after that, I was unable to sleep. Ben and Alicia helped me more than I can ever repay. They saved my life. 5 years later, I thought I was free of him until I received a message from an unknown number saying, "Hey, it's Mark. Remember me?" I used to work with Ryan. One abrupt movement made me flinch. The sound of snapping stems made me sick to my stomach. I began therapy. Gradually, I rebuilt myself. I thought you ought to be aware of what transpired. I felt sick to my stomach. He informed me that Ryan had begun seeing a new woman within months after being released early for good behavior. Elise was her name. One night, according to Mark, they got into a fight. Her neighbors phoned the police when she failed to show up for work. Ryan was seated near the bathtub as they got into the house. The body of Eliza was submerged in water. Someone snapped her neck. He said, "I broke a flower," as he poured water over her head. I didn't intend to. All I wanted was for her to remain attractive. Just before the police arrived, he called Mark in tears. I felt as though the room was spinning when I read, "I broke a flower again." According to my therapist, memories of trauma might resurface as physical discomfort. It did that evening. 4 weeks, I suffered from nightmares. I saw a smile on his face in every dream. I still occasionally remember of that day in front of his stall, clutching a bouquet and whispering, "Stay pretty." I would have been just another name in his story if Ben and Alicia hadn't been present. He broke another flower. I occasionally stop briefly when I walk by a florist's shop. The aroma of daisies, lily, and roses is the same. However, I am unable to enter until the fragrance gets to be too much. I just stand there with my hands shaking. I will always remember the first thing he said. The day we first met. "It appears that you are someone who values beauty." I was unaware that beauty meant possession, something that could not be lost, and something that he had to destroy if it changed. That is the tale of how I overcame the man who loved beauty. My name is Lena Porter. At the time, I was 11 years old enough to recall every single thing. I was still young enough to believe that most things in the world were nice. My mother had enrolled me in a Northern Oregon youth hiking program that summer. She claimed that it was meant to develop character, which I believe was I spend too much time playing games indoors, she said politely. In all, there were 6 of us children: Chris, Jenna, Luke, Tara, Chris, and Ms. Allison, our group leader. Prior to that week, I had never met any of them, but by the 3rd day, we had become friends over the endless uphill treks, insect stings, and inexpensive trail mix. The air smelled of moist earth and pine that morning, and it was cold. We were traveling through a forest reserve close to Lake Wren on a small track. It was only meant to be a 3-mile loop. I recall thinking it wasn't as horrible as I had initially thought, but halfway through, Luke giggled when Jenna said, "Hey, I really got to pee. Simply hide behind a tree. It's the natural world. Who gives a damn?" She glared at him, her eyes cutting through the mist. "I'm not going to squat in poison ivy." I somewhat concurred with her. Miss Allison then gestured to a decrepit wooden sign that was affixed on a post up ahead. "Area of rest 0, 3 miles. Lucky for you," she grinned and replied. We followed the notice down a tiny road that wound between the woods, which said, "There's a restroom up ahead, probably built for campers back in the day." It became quieter as we traveled farther. Just the crunch of our sneakers on old leaves, no wind, no birds. I detested the restroom as soon as we actually saw it. It was a little cinder block structure with peeling paint and vines growing up the walls that perched on the edge of a clearing. One of the doors was a little off balance. The entire area appeared to have been abandoned for many years. Jenna's nose furrowed. "You must be joking with me." Miss Allison let out a sigh. "It's preferable to nothing. You to leave. Here, we'll wait." Jenna glanced at me as I paused. "Hurry up. I'm not going in if we don't go together." It was always that way. Peer pressure masquerading as camaraderie. I decided to follow her. I felt the air inside slap me. The scent was a combination of mildew and decay. The back of my throat ached from something bitter and delicious. There were brown streaks on the walls. The corners were covered in cobwebs. The faint illumination from the tall windows scarcely assisted. Jenna let out a groan. "This area is awful." "Jesus, yeah," I replied, attempting to chuckle. "Not now," she mumbled. "I'd rather urinate in the woods." We selected to stalls next to each other. Let's just be quick. When I closed mine, the hinges creaked. Names, dates, and other texts were etched in graffiti on the metal door. I recall tracing the strange sentence with my finger, assuming it was just a stupid joke that read, "He's still here." The bowl of the toilet was fractured and discolored. I didn't sit. I merely squatted, completed my tasks, and made an effort to breathe deeply. Jenna was washing her hands when I went outside. Well, acting as though it hardly trickled from the sink. Her words, "There's no water," were disgusting. This location ought to be condemned. God. I reached into my backpack. I received hand sanitizer. She smiled. "You save lives." We both froze while we were massaging it. Click. The door behind us closed. The wind wasn't the cause. It was more than a simple floating close. It sounded as if the lock had been turned. From the outside, Jenna muttered, "Did you hear that?" Slowly, I nodded. After 3 full seconds of staring at one another, she approached and gave the handle a try. It remained stationary. She gave it a more vigorous rattle. "Guys, hello, Miss Allison." No response. We began to shout more loudly. I called out, but nothing returned from the tiles. Nothing but quiet. I said, "Maybe it jammed," while attempting to seem composed. She did enough to cause her hands to slip. "Try pulling harder." She mumbled at that moment, "I'll be ill soon," and hurried back to the restrooms. I assumed she was simply in a panic. However, the subsequent sound wasn't a retch. A scream was heard, a shrill shriek of terror that made my knees give way. "Jenna," I yelled as I rushed over. Halfway into the stall, she was on the ground, her hair covering her face from the intense trembling. It wasn't until I followed her eyes that I realized there was a man, or the remnant of a man, slumped over the toilet in the stall. He had grey skin that was peeling as if it had been bathed in some liquid. His gaze were gone, leaving only vacant sockets. Ants scuttled off his lips. His arms dangled in a way that no longer seemed human, and his garments were as rigid as cardboard. A second later, the smell hit me, and I started to gag. When Jenna whispered, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," I felt like hitting the ground. My legs wouldn't move, even though my head was screaming for me too. Then, swam. The door outside shook. From the outside, someone or something was attempting to open it. Jenna took hold of my arm. "Assist me. Someone is out there with him." We retreated toward the distant nook. I dropped my phone while attempting to call out, since my hands were trembling so much. I grabbed it and switched the flashlight on. The stall door was struck by the beam. The hand of the dead had moved. It moved. I swear to God. I kicked the door shut and yelled. The banging ended almost as abruptly as it had begun. We listened to our respiration as we stood there shaking. Then click. The lock rotated. With a creak, the door opened, letting in light. A voice answered, "Sheriff's office. Anyone in here?" We didn't even consider it. Gasping, we sprinted past him into the clearing. There were the others, bewildered and afraid. We were followed out by the middle-aged, mustache-wearing deputy. What on earth is happening? Jenna was crying so much that she couldn't talk. I gestured toward the building's rear. "There is a deceased person in the stall." His expression changed. Immediately, with his hand on his holster, he ordered everyone to remain motionless and entered the building. The ensuing hush was intolerable. The woodland seems to hold its breath as well. He returned a minute later, looking as pale as paper. He looked at us after radioing something we couldn't hear. Quietly, he murmured, "You kids need to get back to camp." He didn't respond when Miss Allison tried to ask him questions. He simply called for assistance and went to his patrol car. She later informed us that the body of a man who had been reported missing 2 weeks prior had been discovered. He had been dead for at least 10 days, according to the coroner. The bit that never made sense, however, is right here. That bathroom door, only the inside was locked. We couldn't have been imprisoned there by anyone. Out of morbid curiosity, I returned to that region once after I had grown up. The structure had been demolished, but the phrases had been spray painted on a nearby tree. "He remains here." I'm not sure if it was a warning or a jest, but occasionally late at night, I can still hear that slight click of the lock and smell that sickening sweet decay. And I question whether we ever actually stepped out of that bathroom. At the age of 24, I was both young enough to disregard my instincts when they cried out to me and old enough to know better. Life was at last beginning to make sense back then. My folks had recently relocated to a new suburban home, one of those gleaming, cookie-cutter houses with driveways and lawns so spotless you could eat them. I initially believed it to be ideal. The smell of a new home, the fresh paint, and the constant hum of the air conditioner. In a short row, we were the first house, followed by 4 others. Roadway, followed by a vacant lot that seemed to silent. Beyond it, a steep hill dropped down into a stretch of crumbling pavement and overgrown weeds that had not been planned for future growth. My father cherished the hill, claimed that it provided a nice view of the house. It gave the impression, in my opinion, that the location was perched on the verge of nowhere. My parents separated after a year. The majority of the warmth in the house was taken with my mom when she packed up and departed. My dad, my younger brother Josh, and I were left. He was constantly absent or buried while still a college student. Within books, Dad also had an early job at a mechanic business. That meant I was alone most evenings. The home became so silent that I could hear the thermostat turning off and the hum of the refrigerator. Though it didn't last long, I persuaded myself it was tranquil. It began modestly. I went downstairs one evening, at around 2 in the morning, to get a drink of water. Instead of using the kitchen light, I utilized the flashlight on my phone so as not to wake anyone. Other than that, the home was pitch black, with shadows engulfing the corners. I froze halfway down the steps, not creaks, but quick steps, as if someone were running across the hardwood from the kitchen to the living room. That sound was familiar to me. Josh used to run around the floor while wearing headphones, and I had heard it 100 times before. Josh was asleep this time, though. "Dad," I said, my voice cracking. I shone my phone at the sound and said, "Nothing." The floor, couch, and kitchen island were all deserted when the slender beam pierced the darkness. It hurt to feel my heart slam so hard against my ribs. I turned on all the lights I could locate and ran the last distance down. Nothing was out of place, and the place was quiet and motionless. I also made sure the backslider was securely shut on the front entrance. I persuaded myself that I was simply exhausted. Perhaps I had heard something ordinary, uninteresting, like the wood expanding or the ice maker dropping. However, the picture of someone racing in the dark, just out of reach, kept coming to me. The situation worsened a month later. That night, I was by myself at home. Josh had classes till late, and Dad was working extra. I was viewing sporadic YouTube videos on my laptop while cuddled up in bed when I became aware of how silent the outer world had become. There were no dogs, no automobiles, and not even the typical street light hum. I took a quick look at the time. 6:03 p.m. The walls were painted orange by the lowering sun. "Dad, when are you going home?" I texted. "Then Josh is going to crash at Bryce's evening. Quick, running late. Be back after 9 o'clock, he said. "Avoid waiting up." Fantastic. Once more, home alone. I put on another video and made an effort to ignore the weight of the air. My bed began to shake at that point. Not like a little shock. Violently, I mean. I could feel the entire frame rattling so strongly. Holish times T. I scurried away from it, my eyes wide. My bookshelf remained stationary. My dresser remained motionless. There were no further tremors in the room, only the bed. Just as abruptly as it began, it came to an end. I touched the mattress with my palm. The slats beneath made a creaking sound, as if they had been raised and then dropped. I muttered, "What the hell?" Ryan, my boyfriend, answered the phone half sleepy when I called him. His voice was sleepy as he whispered, "Calm down, baby. It's most likely from the nearby base. You mentioned that they occasionally conduct tests, correct?" This wasn't noise, Ryan. The bed seemed to have been seized and shaken. He chuckled uneasily. "It might be a minor earthquake or something." No, I surveyed the space. The shadows appeared more profound than normal. It seemed to have come from beneath the bed. The telephone was silent. "Quickly," he said, "don't check. Leave it alone. Go to bed or whatever on the couch." I didn't argue, even though I wanted to. Up till morning, I slept on the couch while watching TV. After then, nothing happened for some time. I began to wonder if it was all in my head. Things like stress, sleep deprivation, etc. Then came the day that was a game changer. That day, I had to leave the house at around 5 in the morning because I was opening at the coffee shop. It was still completely dark in the sky, the kind of darkness that seems to be pressing against the windows. My dad had been married again by this point, and his new wife, Laura, had moved in with her 2 girls. I had to park by the overflow space close to the steep slope because the house was full once more and the driveway was clogged with automobiles. My breath was hazy in front of me that morning due to the chilly temperatures. With the exception of a few crickets and the distant hum of a generator, the neighborhood was completely. I heard it as I passed the deserted lot. My name is as obvious as day. Lena. I came to a complete halt. It was not a murmur, was relaxed and informal, as if someone had just noticed me and wanted to draw my attention. My eyes were having a hard time adjusting. I wheeled toward the slope. All that was visible were overgrown plants and darkness. My throat became parched. "Hi there." No response. Then, closer this time, I heard it again. "Come on over, Lena." My dad's voice sounded like that, but it was incorrect. Off. I began to back away while gripping my keys tightly enough to dig into my palm. "Are you there, Dad?" No answer. Only the sound of plants rustling by the slope. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, slow ones going uphill. I turned and ran a few times. My heart was thumping so hard I could taste it in my lips when my shoes hit the pavement. I got into my car, turned on the headlights, and slammed the locks. Nothing. It's just weeds in the chilly wind. But I briefly noticed something at the hill's edge before I started to back away. A man, or perhaps something resembling a man, standing motionless. Later that day, I expected my dad to chuckle when I told him about it. However, he didn't. "That hill's weird," he said after staring for a while, because the lot was supposed to be another house. But they stopped building halfway through, stated. As if the ground were giving way, the foundation continued to crumble. After that, I made an effort to forget about it, but I still feel the same heavy air whenever I visit him. He still resides in that quiet, which doesn't sound empty, but rather vigilant. Claims that he has never had any unusual experiences. However, I swear I can still hear it when I spend the night there. Soft footsteps can occasionally be heard on the floor while everyone is asleep. I can occasionally still hear it calling my name when I park close to the hill, as if it's waiting for me to respond. About 5 years ago, in the late fall, I moved into the Ridgeway apartments. I was 27 years old at the time, trying to start over in a tiny area outside of Cincinnati to ending a long-term relationship. The building wasn't collapsing, the rent was low, and I had a reliable job at the car shop that paid the bills. It was mine, even though it wasn't flashy. The location wasn't particularly noteworthy. Thin walls, beige carpets, and a balcony with a view of the parking lot. The apartment directly above me remained unoccupied for the first few months, and my flat was on the 2nd story. The silence seemed kind of nice. No stomping, no footsteps, and no toilet running at 2 in the morning. Around December, that changed. I still recall the first evening I became aware that someone had moved in. I had just prepared some ramen after returning home from a late shift and crashed on the beer on the couch. I heard a dull thud above me about midnight, followed by another. A dragging sound, as if someone were dragging items across the floor, was then heard. "All right," I said to myself in a whisper. The noise persisted, but I suppose the new man is remodeling. Thud, thud. A hushed cry. Halfway to my lips, I sat up straight. It was a real scream, not a television. It was brief and ended abruptly, like if someone had covered their lips with their palm. I lowered the TV's volume and simply listened. There was silence for a few seconds, followed by a faint, heartbeat-like hammering that reverberated through the ceiling. It was probably just a noisy movie, I thought myself. New neighbor with presumably strange movie tastes. I ignored it, but it continued. I heard it sporadically throughout the next few evenings, sometimes at midnight and other times around 3 in the morning. The dragging, the thudding, the hushed sobs. I was unable to determine whether it was a woman or a man. A week later, I was done. I made the decision to go upstairs the following evening. It was approximately 1:15 a.m. The thudding had returned, and to be honest, it sounded like someone hitting a wall. My stomach turned over. I rang his doorbell, stomped up the stairs, and grabbed a hoodie. No response. I waited and called once again. I heard the deadbolt slide at last. A man emerged when the door creaked open, tall but slumped, perhaps in his mid-40s, with thin red hair slicked back as if he had just taken a shower. He had light skin. Not only am I pale, but I'm greyish, almost ashy, from working night shifts. I was surprised by his gaze. They had this strange reddish-brown colour. They appeared annoyed for a moment, as if the hallway light was scorching them. I said, hey, in an attempt to be informal. Sorry to bother you, man. I live right below you. I've been hearing some loud banging and yelling. Everything okay up here? He didn't respond. He simply stared. His eyes fell down my chest, then to my throat. I cleared my throat and shifted. Sir, he said, blinking slowly as if I had just yanked him out of a reverie. Then out of nowhere, he said with a broad smile that was too rigid to appear natural. He said, "You from downstairs," in a low, raspy voice that sounded like dry leaves scuffing the sidewalk. "Good to meet you," he said, leaning his head against the door frame. I answered, "Yeah, a bit," in an attempt to maintain a cordial relationship. "Nice troubling you." Merely wanted to confirm that no one was harmed or anything. Slowly, he nodded. "Nobody is harmed." His tone made my stomach knot. And then he stepped back into the shadows of his flat and whispered, "Hold on a second." I remained, nevertheless, half anxious, half intrigued. Inside, the lights were off. I attempted to look through the door's opening, but all I could see were shadows. It had an odd, metallic fragrance, like wet iron or coins. He returned in perhaps 30 seconds. He had a glass in his hand. Inside, a dark red liquid swirled. "Peace offering," he continued with the same strained grin as he held it out to me. I gazed at it and said, "Homemade juice," whispering, "Thanks, but I'm good." "Try it," he said. "It's rich." His use of the word rich sickened me. I gave a head shake. "No, dude. Thank you nonetheless." I didn't say a word, but he turned and went straight back downstairs, my heart thumping so hard I could hear it in my ears. He just stared at me, still holding the cup, and then he made a wet gulp sound that made my skin crawl. When he lowered the glass, a line of red dripped from his mouth, and he whispered, "Delicious." For a few nights, everything was quiet again, but then the whispering began. I would hear a man mumbling something like a prayer, and I would see him sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding that same glass, tilting it back and forth in the light of the hallway lamp. It began at around 2:30 a.m., right outside my door. I would bang on the door once and yell, "What the hell are you doing?" He smiled up at the peephole and said, "Tasting." "Yeah, that guy in 3B, I said when I called the landlord the following morning. "There is a problem with him," I said. "He's hanging around my door drinking and making noise all night long. I'm not even sure what he's drinking." Mr. Harlan is the landlord's side. He's unique, pays cash up front, has never had a complaint, and he's really freaking me out. "I'll check on it," I said. When I woke up a week later, I heard my doorknob rattling, not a slight twist as if someone was attempting to open it. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my dresser, and tiptoed to the door. When it stopped, I heard a whisper, "Let me in." The landlord had promised this, but I never saw him follow through on it. "Back the hell off or I'm calling the cops," I said as I froze and glanced through the peephole to see Mr. Harlan standing barefoot, face inches from the door, breathing heavily. "You smell clean tonight," he remarked softly, grinning and tilting his head. That was the last time I slept. The following morning, I made a police call. When the two officers returned, one of them shrugged and said, "He's strange but harmless." He said he was knocking to apologize for the noise. Apologize at 2 o'clock in the morning. I said they gave me that exhausted cop look, the one that says, "You're wasting our time. Just call if it happens again." It occurred again. Worse. 2 nights later, my power abruptly went out while I was watching TV, leaving the room completely dark. A few seconds later, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps above me, followed by the faint sound of something dripping. I quickly grabbed a flashlight and pointed it at the ceiling, where a dark stain was spreading and something thick was seeping through the drywall. I ran upstairs and hammered on Harren's door, saying, "Open up, Harren. What on earth or how are you up here?" No response. Then I heard a low chuckle coming from behind the door. "You really shouldn't interrupt me during dinner," he said quietly. Then I heard the humming once more, followed by a metallic clink that sounded like a tray being set down. I should have left, but I chose to call 911 instead because I felt compelled to see that the door wasn't locked. I pushed it open, and it creaked open. The apartment was completely dark, save for a single lamp on the counter, and its light flickered. The smell hit me first, the same coppery stench, stronger than before. Newspaper clippings of missing people were all over the walls, and each one was marked with red ink. Then I saw him standing in the kitchen, back to me, with his shirt off and his skin nearly translucent in the light. He had a mason jar in one hand and a syringe in the other. "Jesus Christ," I gasped, and as he turned slowly, I noticed that the jar was half full of something viscous and red. "I was hoping you'd come," he said with a smile. I fell back, grabbing for my phone, but he moved faster than I could blink. He grabbed me by the jaw, fingers like iron, and placed the jar against my lips. "Drink," he murmured. I choked, coughed, and tried to spit out the liquid, but he covered my mouth and nose until I had no choice but to swallow. "You taste better already," he said, throwing me to the ground and pinning my arm down as I felt the syringe stab me in the vein. "Let's see what's inside you," he said. I tried to twist free, but he was incredibly strong. He drew blood and muttered, "Not bad," he whispered. "Not pure, but not bad." My own blood glinted in the light. The plunger filled quickly, and he poured it into his jar, swirling it like wine and taking a taste. I made an effort to defend myself, but my mind was racing. Everything became hazy. "You'll do nicely. You'll get used to it. I always keep one," he said, coming close to my ear, as I recall. Then nothing happened. It had been daylight when I awoke. On my own couch, I was lying. My arm hurts. My elbow crease had a bandage applied on it. I found my dead phone on the floor. The interior of the door was locked. A message written in red marker was resting on my counter. "Eat healthily. No fat. No alcohol. Soon, I'll taste you once more." I ripped it up right away. I didn't get off my couch that night. I skipped meals, remained motionless. As I waited for the knob to turn, I simply gazed at my door. Days went by. Nothing took place. I then heard footsteps once more on the 5th night. "Be cautious and slow." He had returned. I required a strategy. I thus made one. I just ate junk food, fried food, and alcohol for the next week. I got sick from burgers, fries, beer, or anything else that made my blood taste bad, but I didn't care. Indeed, one evening at approximately 3 in the morning, my door squeaked open. I had purposely left it unlocked. His breath came to me slowly, then raggedly, almost excitedly. "Let's check to see if you have changed," humming that same melody. He knelt next to my couch, needle ready. I allowed him to doodle for a few seconds after he sunk it in. He then sucked the blood off the tip of the needle. He immediately gagged. He clutched his stomach and rasped, "What did you do?" "Taco Bell," I informed them. With a strong retching, he staggered back. I took the beer bottle off the table and slammed it into his skull, saying, "That was my chance." I tackled him while putting duct tape across his wrists after he collapsed, disoriented. He burst into a deep, guttural chuckle. "You think this stops me?" I shook and yelled, "Why me?" He simply smiled through blood-stained teeth and asked, "Why my blood? I don't drink everyone, only the ones who feel alive, the ones who still dream." I nearly vomited. Taking a pair of pliers out of my toolbox, I pried open his mouth. The front teeth of his mouth were broken and stained. I muttered, "What the hell are you?" He began to scream, "Lucifer, please bring me." With unimaginable strength, he ripped off the duct tape and sprang at me. After sprinting to the restroom, I secured the door. He began to beat it. With trembling voice, I dialed 911 and said, "Father, thank thee for the feast." The hammering became louder. My neighbor broke in. "He's trying to kill me." "Stay on the line," the dispatcher answered. "Officers are on their way. You'll crave it soon, too," he said softly as the officers dragged him out of the bathroom, and I saw him handcuffed and bleeding from his arm, with one of the cops' down neck covered in blood. The wood splintered, then sirens, and he stopped. I heard footsteps, shouting, gunshots, and silence. I discovered later that his name wasn't Harlan. Caleb Raw was the one. He was 83. In person, he hadn't looked a day older than the old man in his driver's license photo. In his apartment, they discovered dozens of blood jars with dates and names written on them. 4 years, he had been relocating to different cities. He was dubbed the Blood by the news. In the same week, I moved out. I was unable to even look at a needle without trembling 4 months thereafter. I had to go outside to get some fresh air whenever someone at work cut their finger. "Hey, you look pale, man. You sure you ain't being drained?" was a joke made by a co-worker, and I almost punched him. Counseling was beneficial. I eventually came to believe that it was only a man, a psychopath, and nothing more. However, I occasionally wake up at 3 in the morning. I wonder whether he's still out there because I can still hear light footsteps above me, albeit in a separate apartment. If someone else is trying to convince themselves that it's nothing, they may be hearing the same thuds through their roof. I'm trying not to think that someone is tasting and whispering upstairs. The summer it occurred, I was 16. I used to live in a little Ohio town where people seemed to know each other well, yet it never spoke to one other directly. The biggest stories of the week at our school were usually about who had a romantic relationship following prom, or whose parents had divorced. Life seemed safe, predictable, and modest. I believed it to be. However, I met a guy online, and that was the beginning. Landon Price was his name. About 15 minutes away was the high school he attended, and when he left a comment on a photo that my buddy had tagged me in, we had begun corresponding on Facebook. I wasn't used to him. He was taller, rather heavy, had brown hair that fell in his eyes all the time, and had a quiet voice that gave the impression that he was shy. He texted me good morning and inquired about my day, as if he truly cared, which was surprisingly kind of him. We made the decision to get together after a few weeks. We went on our first date to the neighborhood theater off Main Street, where the popcorn still tastes like cardboard and the seats still creak. He offered me a blue slushie and chuckled when I started to lose my mind in the middle. Via the sneak peeks, he was pleasant yet appeared anxious, and my heart did that fluttery thing that only occurs when you're 16 and foolish enough to believe that love can't harm you. When he held my hand during the film, although I was unaware of it at the time, I would never feel secure in my own flesh again after that night. He visited to meet my folks a week later. I could see my mom was watching every move he made while she was preparing lasagna and attempting to act cool. In contrast, my father hardly spoke, instead observing him intently through the rim of his beer bottle. My dad saw something as Landon rolled up his jeans to sit on the couch. The ankle monitor was black. The room's air instantly changed. My mother's fork froze in mid-mouth. My father cleared his throat. "Son, you want to tell us what that's about?" he asked. Landon looked down and laughed awkwardly. "Yes, indeed. That it's actually kind of dumb. I was spending too much time with the wrong people. I got caught up in something, but I assure you it's not a huge problem. Just curfew-related home arrest." My dad wasn't buying it, even though he grinned as if it didn't matter. I received a thorough lecture about my prohibition of seeing him again that evening. According to my parents, he was trouble. I was not even allowed to text him. I didn't listen, of course, because I was 16 and brimming with adolescent rebellion. At that age, rebellion is equated with independence. I so continued to see him, behind their backs, around reality. I would meet Landon at his house or somewhere around town, but I pretended to my parents that I was going to the library or hanging out with friends. Something seemed strange the moment I walked into his house for the first time. This little sagging house on a dead-end street was the location. The siding was peeling, and there were cigarette burns on the couch on the front porch. The stench of sour beer and worn carpet filled the air within. In the kitchen, his mother was seated and starting a cigarette on the stove. She gave me a thorough examination before declaring, "You're too pretty for him." She then returned to smoking. I thought she was kidding, so I laughed awkwardly. Landon did not respond at all. As if nothing unusual had happened, he simply took my hand and walked me to his room. Before the day, everything changed. We spent a few times there playing video games, chatting, kissing, and doing other normal things. It was an afternoon on a Saturday. It was not intended for his parents to be at home. I noticed something out of the corner of my eye when we were playing about in his room. The blinds are fluttering. His father's face was visible through the slats when I turned to look at him. I went cold. "Andon, what the devil? Your father is observing us." His father had already vanished when Landon leapt to his feet and dashed to the window. He rubbed his face and moaned, "Don't panic. All right. My dad is strange. He simply enjoys redheads." "Do you mean that he enjoys redheads?" I snatched my shirt and snapped. He simply gazed at the ground. "He's messed up. Like I mentioned. He's already done it. Ignore him." I went out. His mother was sitting at the counter, this time holding a cracked pipe rather than a cigarette. When I passed through the kitchen, her eyes were hazy and her hair was matted as she giggled at the TV. For me, that was it. I decided I was done with it all as I walked home. I broke up with him the following day at the YMCA parking lot. He appeared pallid, as if he hadn't had any sleep. He didn't become upset when I told him it was done. He simply began to sob loudly and tremblingly, drawing attention from onlookers. He said, "You can't do this. I need you. I'm sick." "What are you talking about?" "I have cancer," he said gently. "It's spreading. The treatments aren't working. You can't leave me now. You're all I have." I was just staring at him. I didn't know how to deal with that kind of guilt when I was 16. Although I didn't think he was telling the truth, I also didn't want to accuse him of lying. "We can still be friends, okay?" I replied, and he nodded, wiped his eyes, and smiled a little, but not very much. However, after that day, everything was different. It began modestly. He would appear at school outside of my lessons. He didn't go there. He didn't attend any classes, but he had transferred a week before, presumably solely to be close to me. While I sat at my desk, he would simply observe through the window in the corridor. I would leave when the bell sounded, and he would follow me, always 10 feet behind, without a word or a touch. My best pal said, "Girl, that dude gives me the creeps." One day, my friend Jamie said in a whisper, "You need to tell someone." I was afraid. I chose to ignore it because I didn't want to exacerbate the situation. A huge error. He began taking my bus home a week later. He didn't even reside close to my path. He would sit to rows back and stare out the window without saying anything. He would follow me to my driveway after I got off, pause at the sidewalk, and observe. He would remain until my parents' vehicle arrived, then turn to leave, each and every day. Maybe he was only trying to show me that he cared by apologizing. I told myself, but I knew better. I told him to stop one evening. "Landon, seriously, leave me alone. This isn't normal." I turned around in the middle of the walkway, and he simply grinned. This flat, dead smile. "You'll have second thoughts. You always do." Then the phone calls began. 1 or 2 per night at first, then dozens. I would respond and get no response. Songs, then whispering. He would play strange love songs he wrote about me while strumming his guitar. At other times, he would howl until I hung up, not with words, but like a wild animal. He would call from another number after I blocked his. Another one came after I blocked that one. Over 100 calls are missed every night. Half violent, half sweet. I discovered a stuffed snowman on my porch one evening when I got home. One of those Christmas ones with motion-activated music that plays when you touch the hand. This one, however, was wrapped in some sort of gel and had a knife plunged through its brain. I leaned in. I had previously mentioned that I enjoyed the aroma of his deodorant. A tiny recorder had taken the place of the small speaker. I pressed it, and his voice played instead of Frosty the Snowman's, "Riley, you're mine forever. You will never escape." My dad thought I was being attacked, so he hurried outside when I yelled so loudly. At that point, everything started to get out of hand. When my mother called the school, they became involved. Despite being barred from college and suspended for harassment, he persisted. He would simply stand across the street and wait at my bus stop every morning. He would follow me like an unforgiving shadow all the way home. Then it became physical one afternoon. I had earplugs on as I walked home, acting as though I didn't see him behind me. I heard running footsteps all of a sudden. He rammed into me as I turned. I initially believed he was attacking me, but then he put his arms around me. It was a suffocating grip that made breathing difficult, not an embrace. I cried out, "Leave me alone." However, he simply muttered, "I missed you," and tightened his grip. There was a pop in my chest. A searing agony arose up my side. When he finally did, I dropped on my knees, When he finally did, I dropped on my knees, gasping, "Let go." He burst into tears once more and apologized incoherently before bolting into the woods behind my street. I visited the emergency room that evening due to a shattered rib. My dad phoned the police, but they were powerless to do much because there was no evidence of intent. We followed their instructions to document everything. Then came the night I will always remember. It was approximately 3 in the morning. I have no idea why I woke up. I simply did. No noise, no dream, just this sensation. You are aware of the adage that someone is observing you if you wake up unexpectedly. Yes, that. In an attempt to shake it off, I went downstairs to get a glass of water. I noticed it when the stainless steel of the refrigerator reflected the light from the kitchen. The reflection is moving. Outside the sliding glass door, anything. When I gently turned around, I saw Landon standing in the dark in my backyard, looking directly at me through the glass. His eyes were wide and motionless, half lit by the porch light. The glass shattered at my feet after I yelled and dropped it. Landon was gone by the time Dad had snatched up his rifle and dashed outdoors. When the police arrived, they discovered footsteps in the damp grass that led directly to the area under my bedroom window. He had been observing me while I slept. That was the final straw. My dad reported the incident to all local authorities, and we were given a restraining order. Shortly thereafter, Landon left school. It was silent for a time, calm, but I would receive buddy requests from fresh accounts every few months. The same message each time, no posts, no profile picture. "It's me. Hello. Can we have a conversation?" It always returns even after I block it. Years have passed. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason, I can't resist looking out my window, even though I have no idea where he is or what he's doing. I half expect to see his face staring back at me every time. I can still clearly recall my initial encounter with Nate. It happened in the autumn of 2003. I was a sophomore at Hollow Creek University, a tiny public university nestled in the middle of nowhere and the vast flatlands of East Texas. Back then, I was a journalism major trying to make ends meet with a truck that only started every third try, a part-time job at the university library, and ramen for dinner. The afternoon was one of those humid September days when the air feels like soup. This guy appeared next to me as if we had known each other for ages, while I was half reading a printout for my media ethics class under a dead-looking oak. His smile was languid. "Damn, dude, you look like you're studying for the bar exam," he said. I was trying to pass the midterms when I looked up, squinting against the sun. He gave a nod. There in the shade, starting a cigarette, with his brown skin, strong jawline, and dark hair that seemed to have gone weeks without a brush. He had a certain reckless charm. The phrase Doors 1969 tour appeared on his t-shirt. "I'm Nate," he said, removing ash from his knee. "You, Eli," I said. He extended his hand, as if we were concluding a transaction. "Good to meet you, Eli," was the first thing that was said. An accidental meeting that seemed innocent enough at the time. I would have laughed in your face if you had told me then that Nate would turn out to be one of the most unsettling individuals I had ever encountered. He was just a humorous, erratic man back then who didn't care what people thought. In our dorm, he lived down the hall from me. He was always the loudest person in the room, taunting everyone, telling stories, and making jokes, all without ever getting slapped across the face. People laughed at him. However, there was also something else. His eyes had an odd intensity, as if he was constantly assessing you and making calculations. I dismissed it at first. There are a lot of strange people at college, but the more time I spent with Nate, the more I realized how unique he was. We were all playing cards in the dorm lounge one evening. A joke regarding who would live through a zombie apocalypse was made. Nate grinned as he reclined in his chair. "I think Eli would try to bargain with the zombies," he stated. Everyone chuckled. However, I would keep it simple. "You simply must not care who you murder." As if it were unimportant, he stated it. I felt a little shiver, though, because of the way he looked at me when he said it, as if he was trying to gauge how I would react. "Dude," I stumbled out a laugh. He smiled and said, "You're creeping people out, man. I'm just saying, sometimes you have to be cold in order to survive." They all returned to the game, but the way he said it stuck with me. To him, it wasn't a joke. Nate has a tendency to arrive without invitation. He would arrive at 2 a.m. He would sit on my couch for hours, discussing the world, his family, and his thoughts about people's wiring, all while carrying a case of beer and saying things like, "Couldn't sleep. Figured you couldn't either. What a piece of work my old father is," he would tell me. He believes that he can purchase my respect, sends whatever is convenient, be it money, automobiles, or guilt. I once told him that I would value him more if he died. He didn't flinch at all. When he stated that, he chuckled, but his laughter was devoid of humor. Occasionally, he would entirely change his direction. Everyone would want to hang out with him because he was such a charming and amiable person. He would persuade campus security to ignore parties, seduce ladies into attending study sessions that weren't actually study sessions, and persuade academics to grant extensions. I was the only person he could persuade to do anything. Even though I liked him, there was something about him that made me uneasy. That winter, things began to grow gloomier. One freezing night, we sipped cheap whiskey from a plastic bottle while sitting on the steps outside the dorm. The campus was quiet at roughly 1 in the morning, save for the distant barking of a dog and the soft hum of vending machines. Nate said, "Hey, Eli," in an oddly serene tone. I thought it was just another of his hypothetical queries, so I laughed when he said, "How much money would it take for you to kill someone?" We used to constantly make jokes about unrelated topics. He continued, "Just someone, a person you don't know, say they deserve it, but you don't really know the details." I laughed. "Man, I don't know. Couple million maybe." He looked at me blankly. "Depends," I answered. "You think I'm doing that for gas money?" He leaned back against the wall, his breath creating tiny clouds in the chilly air. "Jesus, Nate," I said, half laughing. "No. What kind of question is that?" He shrugged. "Just curious. That's way too much. Dude, it's murder." He said it like someone who had been planning it, thinking about it. And by spring semester, Nate stopped going to class. He was living off campus with an older woman he claimed was cool with anything. And I hardly saw him other than the occasional late-night text. You ever think that sometimes people just get what's coming to them? Sometimes it's not murder. It's justice, that sort of thing. Then one day, he disappeared, dropped out, and returned to his hometown somewhere around Amarillo. I assumed that was it. Nate would disappear, reappear, or perhaps appear on some strange reality show. Life continued, and I graduated 2 years later, got a job writing for a small paper in Dallas, and finally stopped thinking about him until I received a call one afternoon from an unknown number. Eli man, long time. Nate, holy crap. Guy, where have you been? Everywhere. He chuckled. Hey, listen, I'm going down your way soon. We should hook up, really. Sure, I responded. His voice was familiar, harsher, older, but still Nate. Brings you here. Sort of business, family matters. But I'm about to get rich. I'm considering doing something big, like going to Mexico and having a good time like we used to. You in? I thought it was just his typical bullshit. You money. That'll be the day. You'll see. We spoke for a little while longer, mostly small talk, and then he hung up. I didn't give it much thought until 2 weeks later, when I was looking through the news. I saw the headline, 3 found dead in alleged home invasion in West Texas, survivor in critical condition. The pictures showed a familiar ranch-style house, police tape, flashing lights, and then a picture of Nate. He said, "You'll see real soon." The article stated that he was the only survivor of a home invasion in which his parents and younger sister were killed, and that he had been shot. I froze, looking thinner, pale, and with his arm bandaged in a sling. I remember sitting there for a long time, staring at the screen, and my first reaction was not sadness, but disbelief. Nate had always spoken of his parents as though they were the enemy, but I never believed he meant it literally. Over the next few weeks, I tried calling him. After 6 months, the story didn't sit right. The police claimed there was no evidence of forced entry. The suspect had been shot dead at the scene. There were inconsistencies all over the place. And then there was the twist I still can't get rid of. I sent a few messages, but got no response. I assumed he was probably drowning in grief, and who could blame him? Later, I received a message from my college roommate Dylan that said, "Dude, you need to see this." He sent me a link. According to the article, investigators had discovered texts between Nate and the man who had broken into his house, the alleged intruder, that detailed payments, planning, and even how Nate would need to be shot in order for the story to be credible. He had offered the man $50,000 to kill his family. His father barely survived and told police everything, and I couldn't breathe reading that. All those nights, all those jokes, all that casual talk about killing for money. It wasn't a game. It had been his plan all along. I went to the trial. He had even planned the time, so he could be injured but survive. Apparently, it all went wrong when the shooter hesitated, and Nate panicked, resulting in a gunfight that killed his own sister instantly. Don't ask me why. Perhaps I needed closure. Perhaps I wanted to see if he would look at me, to see if I'd ever mattered in his twisted head. He had an older, thinner appearance, buzzing short hair, and an expressionless face. He didn't flinch when they read the charges: conspiracy to commit murder, capital murder, attempted murder. But everything stopped when his father took the stand. He was pale, trembling, and his voice trembling as he described waking up to gunfire and realizing his own son was involved. When the prosecutor asked if he wanted the death penalty, Nate's father replied, "No, I want him to live with what he's done." Nate just sat there and stared at him without showing any emotion. I realized something terrible as I sat there. I used to be friends with this man. We had eaten together, laughed together, shared secrets, trusted him, and all that time, he had been practicing how far he could go before people noticed. Years have passed, but occasionally I still dream about that night on the dorm steps, the whiskey, the stars, his voice echoing softly, and I wondered how much money it would take to kill someone. I was unaware at the time that I was speaking to someone who had already chosen his phone number, and whenever I think of him, I recall what he said in one of his late-night texts, which I wrote off as edgy bullshit back then. Individuals like as me are not caught. We grow weary. He was mistaken about just one thing. He was apprehended. However, I continue to wonder how many people are like him, are present. People are waiting for the appropriate opportunity while grinning and laughing. a chance to flip everything on its head. And occasionally, late at night, I can hear his voice again when I glimpse my reflection. In the back of my mind, everything was cool and serene. Eli, everyone has a number. You simply have yet to locate yours.